name is Jim Butterfield, and I'd like to tell you about the Commodore 64. It's a pretty good computer. It has a lot of features. Very good color, sound, picture, graphics, an excellent keyboard, a huge amount of memory, and the price is certainly right. Let's take a look inside the box and see what we have in here. The first thing you'll see when you open the box is the Commodore 64 itself. That's the whole computer. It looks just like a typewriter keyboard, but it's everything. All we need to do is to connect it up. Let's see what else we have in the box waiting for us. In here we have the Commodore 64 User's Guide. That's a very useful book. You'll need that. Don't throw it away. All sorts of cables and connectors in here. The first and most important is we need to be able to connect power into the computer. We'll do it through this transformer regulator device. But there's more. This cable is to connect from the computer almost to your TV set. In order to complete the connection to your television set, you'll need one more thing, an antenna switch box, and this comes inside the box too. It has a little switch on it. We'll show you how to use it later. Let's put the box away. And let's just take a look at the connections that you have on the Commodore 64 before we hook it up. First of all, over here we have two what are called control ports. They're used for things like joysticks, paddles, and even specialized things like light pens and so on. Next to this we have our on-off switch, but that's no good to us until we hook up the power, and the connector next to it, that's where the power goes. Let's go. We have lots more connections, so let's go around the corner here. And here we have what is called a cartridge connector. That's where most of our big things plug in, such as extra memory, large cartridge programs. Next to it, we have a little channel selector. You can select either channel 3 or channel 4, depending on which channel is available in your television viewing area. And here is the connector that will hook up to our TV set. Continuing along there, sometimes you may have something a little classier than the TV set called a monitor. If you do, you don't want this connection. That's called an RF signal. You'll want the one next to it. That's a signal for a monitor called a video signal. We'll talk about that again in a moment. Next to it, this is called the serial bus connector. This one will hook up to devices like floppy disk, like your printer, for example. Notice that one connector hooks up to everything. One connector serves all. But there's still more. The next one is where we connect our cassette tapes, our Commodore data set, as it's called now. This is a device you can use to store programs or data. We'll look at that in a moment too, but that's where it plugs in. And finally, we have what's called a user port. That can be used for anything you like. But the most common use is for a modem to plug in something for communications to other computers, to other cities. Okay, we finished our tour. Let's plug this machine in. We'll start with our power end. First of all, let's get all of these cables loose. And we'll take the rubber band off here. Okay, here we go. This is quite heavy, so put it on the floor somewhere convenient. This part plugs into the power connector we mentioned previously. Let's take a look at that, and here we go. Okay, now this part will plug into our power plug in the floor. We'll hook that up a little later. The only thing left now is to hook up our TV set. Here we have quite a long cable. So if you have a big TV set, you can stand well back from it. There's a lot of distance here. Once again, the place we hook it up, on the back, TV sets plug into this connector here called the RF connector, and this is what goes to the TV set itself. But first, the antenna switch box. We plug it in there, and if we want to watch TV, we can hook our antenna there. If for watching TV, we switch over to our antenna. For using the computer, we switch over to computer. Either way, the signal comes in and hooks onto the back of our television set. Here, let's turn our computer around again, and we'll hook things into the back of our TV set on the little screw terminals that you always find there. Okay, and there we go. By the way, there are some sorts of television sets that have an unusual antenna connection. Instead of the 2 screw connections, you'll find a little, what's called a 75 ohm connection. If you have that, you can buy a little adapter at your television store to do the job on there. Now, that's all we need for our minimum computer setup. The things that come in the box and your home television set. But if you want to, you can spend extra money and you can get a more deluxe version of the 64. You can add things to it. I'd like to talk about some of those. Let's move over to the desk here and talk about what we have here. First of all, this is not a television set. This is called a monitor. About the only way you can tell the difference is that this one doesn't really have a tuner. You can't select which channel you want to watch because directly from, on the different connector, directly from the Commodore 64, and it plugs into the video connector on the front to give you a much better quality picture. Now, this particular monitor is a Commodore 1701, and besides the regular video connector, there are some extra connections on the back which give you a very, very good quality picture. If you have a Commodore 64 and this Commodore video monitor, do try to get a special cable. It doesn't come in the box. Try to get a special cable to hook up to the connections on the back of your TV set. You'll get a much, much better picture. Just a marvelous picture. It's well worth the extra trouble to get the cable. Now, a monitor costs extra money because you haven't got one of them sitting around your home all the time, but it does give you a better picture, and there's another advantage, and that is you won't have to fight over who's going to watch the soap operas and who's going to use the computer at any given time. You'll both have your own hookup, and there won't be any conflict there. Let's talk about some of the other things that we connect to a Commodore 64 computer. This is called a data set. It's a type of cassette recorder, and what it contains when we open it up is a conventional cassette tape, very much like the tapes that you'd use for example, recording music. They're identical tapes, but the information on them is not music, it's programs or it's computer data. This is one of the ways of storing programs and data. A different way is to use what's called a floppy disk drive, which is this device over here. This one holds its information, once again magnetically, but on a device which is called a floppy disk. You can hold a great deal of information on a floppy disk, and you can recall it very, very quickly if you want to, but when you have a floppy disk system, you have to pay a fair amount of money. And so if you're economy-minded, you'll probably go over to the cassette. If, on the other hand, you want the deluxe version for storing programs, you'll probably pay extra and go for the disk. It's your choice, and in fact, you can have both. Finally, the only other accessory that we haven't talked about that we have on the table here now is the printer over here. This is used for making a permanent record of things the computer does. After all, you might get a nice report on the screen, but it's very hard to carry away at the end of the day. The screen doesn't carry around quite so easily as a piece of paper. So a printer gives you a way of recording permanently your information, listing out your programs so you can study your programs in your spare time without having to have your computer on, and generally is a very useful accessory. So that's the Commodore 64 as we'd hook it up with some of its accessories. But whether you take the basic unit or whether you add to it, you'll find it's a pretty good machine.